She first saw the boy beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, the kind of light that flickers like a tired heartbeat at the end of a long day. His small hands clutched a worn, stuffed dinosaur pressed tight against his chest. Tears traced faint, shining lines down his cheeks, catching the cold evening air before falling to the pavement. She was rushing for a bus, bag slipping from her shoulder, the taste of late-night coffee still lingering on her tongue. But something in the way he stood there, so still and so lost, pulled her to a stop she couldn't explain. This is Stories That Heal the Heart, where we share quiet human truths about the wounds people carry, the injustices they survive, and the unexpected grace that finds them anyway. These are stories of forgiveness whispered through the cracks of ordinary life, stories that remind us that love has a way of returning even after the world has turned away. If you've ever wondered whether broken bonds can be mended, or whether the past can find its way back to you when you're no longer looking, stay with this one. It may speak to a part of you that you thought had closed itself off long ago. She took a step toward him, rain beginning to mist in the air, soft enough to be almost a memory. His quiet sobs mingled with the hum of distant traffic, with the low buzz of the street lamp, with the whisper of the wind moving through the bare branches above. When he finally looked up, his eyes searched her face with a plea too old for a child his age. She knelt, her knees touching the cool ground, and asked gently whose arms he was trying so hard to find. What she didn't know, what no one standing on that quiet street could have guessed, was that helping this lost boy would lead her back to a woman she once called mother, a woman she believed she had lost forever. The night was about to open a door that had been closed for decades, and behind it waited truths she had spent her entire adult life trying not to feel. A bus hissed to a stop in the distance. A diner sign flickered behind her, half of its letters dimmed, casting a broken glow onto the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, a radio played an old melody through an open apartment window. One of those tunes that carries the scent of another time. She didn't hear the words, but something about its softness brushed against her like a forgotten whisper. He tugged her sleeve, lifting the dinosaur in a shaky grip as if asking whether she could keep him safe. She nodded before she even realized she had. And somewhere in the spaces between those gestures, a kneel, a nod, a quiet sob. A path was forming, one that would take her back to the place where her own childhood had ended too soon. If moments like this remind you that kindness still matters, that small choices can change entire lives, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps these stories reach the hearts that need them most. She rose slowly with the boy's hand in hers, the rain finally beginning to fall with purpose, tapping against the empty street as if urging them forward. Tonight we remember that even in silence, love still answers. She noticed the child before she noticed the rain. A small boy stood alone beneath a trembling street lamp, its tired glow spilling over his shoulders like a fragile halo. He clutched a stuffed dinosaur with the kind of grip children use when the world has suddenly gone quiet around them. The evening breeze lifted the loose strands of his hair, and every few seconds he wiped his face with the back of his hand as if trying to erase whatever had frightened him. She was hurrying toward the last bus of the night, keys in one hand, a half-finished sandwich in the other. But the sight of him, frozen beside the curb, stopped her mid-stride. This is Stories That Heal the Heart, where we tell everyday human stories woven from loss, courage, and the quiet work of forgiveness. Stories shaped by people who carry wounds that never quite closed, and by the unexpected grace that finds them in the most ordinary places. If you've ever felt the ache of a door that closed too early, or wondered whether love can return from the places it disappeared into, this story might speak softly to you. Sometimes the past finds a way back when we least expect it, in the form of a child's trembling hand, or a whisper carried through the rain. She approached him slowly, careful not to startle him. His tiny fingers tightened around the dinosaur, its fabric worn thin along the seam of the tail. A thin stream of cars passed behind them, their headlights stretching across the wet pavement like fleeting promises. The faint hum of a neon diner sign flickered from across the street, spelling and unspelling a word she could not read from where she stood. Somewhere above, a window creaked open, letting out the warm scent of something baking. Cinnamon, she thought. A reminder that some homes still held light at this hour. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wide with a fear that didn't belong to childhood. She knelt beside him, her knees touching the cool concrete, and asked where his mother was. He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted the stuffed dinosaur toward her, as if offering proof that he had not meant to be alone. She felt her breath catch. Something about the gesture, the quiet desperation of it, brushed against a memory she had spent years trying not to revisit. A bus rumbled in the distance, the very one she had been racing to catch. She didn't look back at it. The boy's small hand found hers without waiting for permission, and the faint drizzle became a steady rain, stitching the moment into something she knew she couldn't walk away from. No one on that street could have guessed what would unfold. Helping a lost child seemed simple enough, a duty anyone would feel. What she couldn't know was that the search for his mother would lead her to a door she once knew by heart, a door she had convinced herself she would never face again. If stories like this remind you that a single act of kindness can change the shape of a life, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps these quiet voices travel farther, reaching hearts that still believe in second chances. The boy leaned into her just slightly, as though the warmth of her coat offered him a place to rest. She rose, holding his hand more firmly now, and together they stepped forward into the falling rain, two shadows crossing under the trembling light, walking toward a truth neither of them yet understood. The rain thickened as they walked, turning the street into a soft mirror that caught every passing light. She kept her hand wrapped around the boy's, feeling how small and cold his fingers were against her own. He didn't speak, not yet. Children often retreat into silence when the world tilts too quickly beneath them, and she recognized that silence, not the stubborn kind, but the kind built from fear. They reached the bus stop shelter, its plexiglass walls scratched with initials and old advertisements that had peeled into curled corners. She guided him onto the bench where he sat carefully, keeping the stuffed dinosaur perched on his lap like a guardian. The creature's button eye had loosened nearly to the point of falling, holding on by one last thread. She slid her coat off and draped it around his shoulders, watching the way he clutched its edges as if they were a promise. A woman across the street, gray hair tucked beneath a knitted hat, fed crumbs to pigeons huddled beneath a storefront awning. She looked over once, offering a small nod, not intrusive, just an acknowledgement of two souls in the rain. Then she returned to crumbling the bread, her hands moving slowly, deliberately, as though she'd done this at the same hour every evening. When the boy finally spoke, his voice was so faint she leaned closer to hear him. He whispered his name, Noah, and pointed down the road toward a row of dim apartment buildings. He didn't know the number, he only knew the door was blue. Like the sky, he said. She listened to the tremor in his words, a kind of ache that didn't belong to a 6-year-old. That's when she noticed he kept glancing at her tote bag, Not out of curiosity, but recognition. She followed his gaze to the corner where an old photograph sat tucked between two sketchbooks. She hadn't meant to bring that photograph tonight. It was a face she had tried to fold away from her life. She tucked the photo deeper into the bag before he could see it again, but the gesture sent a dull ache through her chest. A bus rumbled by without stopping, splashing a wave of cold water across the curb. Still, she stayed. The rain had softened into a quiet patter, enough to muffle the sounds of the city, enough to make the world feel small. "We'll find your mom," she told him. He nodded, though his eyes stayed fixed on the street as if expecting her to appear from the shadows. His feet swung gently above the pavement, brushing the puddles but never quite touching them. Every few seconds, he rubbed the dinosaur's tail between his fingers. She recognized the gesture. It was something she had done with the hem of her shirt when she was little, back when waiting meant bracing for whatever version of the night would unfold at home. She stood and motioned for him to follow. He slid off the bench, holding her hand again. They crossed the street toward the row of buildings he'd pointed out earlier. The storefront where the old woman fed the pigeons glowed faintly through its fogged windows, a bakery closing for the night. A young employee swept crumbs from the floor, pausing only long enough to lift a hand in a greeting she didn't expect. The small kindness eased her shoulders. These tiny gestures had a way of reminding her that not all doors stayed shut. Noah guided her down the block, stopping once in front of a fire hydrant painted bright red. He stared at it for a long moment before turning toward a narrow alley cutting between two apartment complexes. The alley smelled of wet cardboard and laundry detergent, the air warm from dryer vents humming behind metal grates. At the end of it stood a staircase with chipped paint and railings rusted to a deep brown. "Is it here?" she asked. He nodded again, though uncertainty clouded his face. She led him up the steps, pausing with him on each landing so he wouldn't slip. A dog barked somewhere in a nearby unit, followed by a soft shush from someone inside. They reached the top floor. The hallway was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb that cast shadows like restless ghosts across the walls. She counted the doors. 1, 2, 3. Each painted in a different shade of wear and weather. Noah stopped at the fourth door and touched it with the palm of his hand. The paint was a fading blue, chipped near the bottom where shoes had scuffed it over the years. "Blue," he whispered. She knelt beside him again, brushing the wet strands of hair from his forehead. "We'll knock together." But before she raised her hand, the door across the hall creaked open. A man carrying grocery bags stepped out, nearly bumping into them. He caught himself, then softened when he saw the boy. "Lost again, buddy?" he asked with a sigh, balancing one of the bags on his hip. "Your mom's been worried sick. I think she called the police." The man glanced at her, then at the dinosaur in Noah's arms. His expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, perhaps pity. He pointed toward the stairwell. "Officer Turner's downstairs. He's been checking each floor." She felt Noah tighten his grip on her hand. They turned toward the stairs. On the landing below, the uniformed officer stood beneath the buzzing light, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. When he saw Noah, relief softened the sternness of his posture. He approached with careful steps, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. "I'm glad you're safe," Officer Turner said. "Your mom's been looking everywhere." But Noah didn't step forward. He stayed pressed against her side, fingers curled in her coat as though she were the anchor keeping him standing. Officer Turner looked up at her, curiosity in his eyes. "Thank you for helping him. Not everyone would have stopped." She shrugged gently, unsure what to say. She had been 5 when she last waited alone for someone who never came. The rain that night had felt just like this, soft at first, then heavy enough to blur the world. She wondered whether anyone had paused for her the way she had paused for Noah. The officer gestured toward the stairs. "Come on, let's take him home." Her heart quickened, though she didn't know why yet. As they descended, the sound of distant thunder rolled through the night, a reminder that some doors, once opened, bring storms with them. They moved down the stairwell together, the officer leading the way while she stayed just a half step behind, letting Noah's small fingers rest inside hers. The stairwell smelled of old rain and warm metal. Every footstep echoed up the concrete shaft like distant memories, the kind that climb back into your chest when you aren't watching. With each level they passed, her breath grew slower, heavier. She didn't know why, not yet, only that something in the air shifted around her, as if the building itself remembered her before she remembered it. On the second-floor landing, a woman opened her door a crack. She peeked out with rollers in her hair and suspicion carved into the lines of her face. When she saw the officer, she softened enough to nod. "Hope the little one's okay," she murmured. Her eyes drifted briefly toward Alyssa, lingering in a way that made her feel as though a page of her own past had been left exposed. Then the woman quietly closed the door again. Noah squeezed her hand. "She'll be happy I'm back, right?" His voice broke slightly on the last word. She knelt to meet his eyes. "I think any mother would be relieved to see her child safe." She meant the words. She also felt the faint sting of them. Relief. It was a language she never fully learned from the woman who raised her in fits and pauses, the woman who left during a storm not unlike this one. She swallowed the memory before it could climb any higher. Officer Turner waited at the bottom step, giving them space but maintaining that steady, watchful presence of someone who had done this before. When she lifted Noah onto her hip to speed the last few steps, the officer's expression softened further. "You're good with him," he said quietly. She didn't answer. Instead, she pushed open the door to the lobby. Rain pressed against the glass windows in sheets now, turning the world outside into a trembling watercolor. The lobby light flickered with a yellow warmth, almost gentle against the storm. A pot of someone's forgotten umbrella dripped onto the tile, forming a spreading puddle. On a bulletin board near the mailboxes, flyers for lost cats, piano lessons, and community dinners curled at the corners. One flyer sat slightly torn near the bottom, a child's drawing taped beside it. The drawing showed a stick figure woman holding hands with a smaller figure. Underneath, a single word written in shaky crayons: Mom. Something about the tiny, hopeful loops of the letters pressed lightly against her chest like fingers knocking from the inside. Officer Turner approached the building's main hallway, where apartment doors stretched long in both directions. "She's in 2B, he said. "We checked twice. She's been frantic." Noah pulled the dinosaur closer. His lip trembled. "Will she be mad?" The officer crouched. "No, son. She's just scared. Scared for you." Alyssa looked down at the boy, so small, so uncertain, searching her face for permission to believe that safety still existed. She brushed his cheek gently with her thumb. "Let's go see her," she said. And though she meant it, the words scraped something deep inside, something she hadn't touched in years. They walked down the hallway together. The storm outside thudded like a heartbeat against the building's walls. With each step, the lights overhead buzzed faintly, as if trying to keep up with them. When they reached 2B, Noah froze. The officer gave him an encouraging nod. Alyssa raised her hand to knock, slow at first. The sound echoed slightly, drifting into the space beyond the door. Seconds passed. Another knock, firmer. Then she heard it. Footsteps on hardwood, hesitant, uneven. Shadows moved beneath the crack of the door. A soft clatter followed, like someone bumping into a piece of furniture while rushing. A latch clicked. The door opened. A woman stood on the other side, breathless, her eyes wide with fear that had not yet broken into relief. She was older now. Her hair threaded with soft silver, her shoulders thinner, her hands trembling as she reached instinctively for Noah. But it wasn't those details that stole Alyssa's breath. It was the shape of her face, the familiar curve of her cheek, the small scar above her eyebrow, the one she'd once kissed goodnight as a little girl, long before she understood what abandonment meant. Rebecca. The name crashed through her like a wave breaking against old stone. For a moment the world narrowed to her heartbeat, a slow, aching thud that seemed to echo down the hallway. She steadied herself against the wall. Her throat tightened, but no sound came. Rebecca didn't look at her at first. She was too busy clutching Noah to her chest, whispering apologies into his hair, pressing frantic kisses against his forehead. My baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked under the weight of fear. Alyssa could only stare. The woman she had spent decades missing, resenting, grieving, was right there, inches away, calling another child my baby with the same tenderness she used to give and take away in confusing tides. Then Rebecca finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes met Alyssa's, and everything inside Alyssa unraveled. Recognition hit Rebecca like a blow. Her lips parted, the color draining from her face. Her grip on Noah loosened slightly as she swayed back a step, one hand covering her mouth. Alyssa. It wasn't spoken as a question, more like a memory escaping before she could trap it. Alyssa couldn't speak. Years of unanswered whys filled her throat like stones. Officer Turner looked between them, unaware of the history unfolding in the air. "Do you two know each other?" he asked carefully. Neither answered him. Rebecca reached for the door frame, her voice trembling. "It can't be. I thought..." But she couldn't finish. Tears welled and trembled at the edge of her lashes. The hallway fell silent except for the storm outside and the shaky breaths of three people caught in the grip of a past they had never expected to face again. Noah looked between the two women, confusion softening into curiosity. "Mom, who is she?" Rebecca swallowed hard, unable to hide the tremor in her hands. "She's someone I lost a long time ago." Alyssa's jaw tightened. The words reopened an old wound, but also illuminated a part of her she hadn't realized had stayed alive. The part that still wanted an answer, a reason, a truth. Rebecca took a small, trembling step forward. "Alyssa, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." The storm outside growled, shaking the windows. Inside, 3 lives stood suspended. A mother who had vanished, a daughter who had been left behind, and a child whose innocence had unknowingly led them back to a door that fate had kept closed for decades. And now, it had opened. For a long, trembling moment, none of them moved. The hallway seemed to hold its breath, the flickering light above them, the muted thunder outside, even the hum of the building settling in its bones. Everything waited for someone to speak, to blink, to breathe in a way that would mark the beginning of whatever this moment was about to become. Alyssa stood rooted to the spot, her pulse pounding in her ears. She hadn't said that woman's name aloud in almost 20 years. She thought she'd buried it, folded it neatly into the parts of childhood she tried never to revisit. But here it was, rising like a ghost, summoned by a child's hand in hers. Rebecca steadied herself against the doorframe. Her eyes shimmered with shock, with something softer beneath it. Something like grief or longing, though Alyssa couldn't trust herself enough yet to name it. The lines on Rebecca's face were new, deeper, shaped by years Alyssa never saw. It felt strange, even unfair, to see time etched into someone who had disappeared from her life long before she learned how to carry her own weight. Officer Turner glanced between them, realizing this reunion wasn't ordinary. He cleared his throat gently. "Maybe we should step inside," he offered. Rebecca blinked as though waking. Yes, of course, please." But Alyssa didn't move. Her feet remained planted on the old hallway carpet, its edges frayed and darkened by time. Noah tugged lightly at his mother's sleeve, sensing the heaviness in the air. Rebecca kissed the top of his head before turning her eyes back to Alyssa, eyes that seemed to ask something she wasn't brave enough to answer yet. "Alyssa," Rebecca whispered, her voice cracking. I don't even know how to begin." Alyssa swallowed hard. "You left," she said quietly. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simply the truth, one that had lived in her like a splinter under the skin. Rebecca's breath caught. Her hand flew to her mouth again, as though she were physically trying to hold her regret in place. "I know," she whispered. "God, I know." A moment stretched between them, wide and fragile, like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Officer Turner stepped back respectfully, giving them space without leaving completely. He remained near the stairwell, hovering in a way that spoke of training, yes, but also intuition. Alyssa finally exhaled a shaky breath and stepped inside the apartment. It was small but warm. A lamp glowed softly from the corner. Toys were scattered across a rug worn soft by years of little feet. A candle flickered on the coffee table, filling the room with a faint scent of vanilla. A scent so gentle, so familiar, it made her chest ache. Rebecca closed the door behind them and hovered near it, as though afraid to get too close, afraid to overwhelm, afraid to breathe wrong. Noah ran to the couch and placed his dinosaur carefully beside a stack of storybooks. Then he looked back at the two women, sensing the unspoken threads between them. Rebecca motioned for Alyssa to sit. Alyssa didn't. She walked slowly around the room, her fingers brushing the back of the couch, the edge of a framed photograph, the corner of a bookshelf. She didn't know what she was looking for. Something out of place, something missing, something that would explain or undo the years between them. But the room revealed nothing except a life built without her. "It wasn't supposed to happen the way it did," Rebecca said softly behind her. "You have to know that." Alyssa turned with a sharp breath. "You walked out. That's what I know." Rebecca flinched, as if struck. "I never stopped thinking about you," she said, voice trembling. "Not for a single day." Alyssa shook her head. Thinking about someone isn't the same as raising them. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was filled with things unsaid, years of birthdays missed, letters unwritten, nights Alyssa had cried into a pillow, wondering what she'd done wrong. Rebecca walked slowly toward the kitchen counter and grasped its edge with both hands. "I left because I thought you'd be better off without me." Alyssa stared at her, stunned into stillness. "You thought abandoning me would help me?" Tears slipped down Rebecca's cheeks. "I was sick then, Alyssa. Not physically, emotionally. I was drowning, and I didn't want to pull you under with me. I told myself you'd have a chance at a steadier life without my instability shadowing every choice. Alyssa stepped back as though the truth had weight. You could have come back. You could have tried. I did, Rebecca whispered. I tried more times than you'll ever know, but by the time I found enough strength to face what I'd done, you were gone. Moved. Disconnected. There was no address, no trail. Her voice cracked, and I was too ashamed to keep searching like a ghost haunting your life. The room fell quiet again. Noah climbed onto the couch, hugging his dinosaur close as he watched the two women with wide, unsettled eyes. Rebecca wiped her tears and steadied her breath. When Noah was born, I promised myself I would be the mother I had failed to be for you, not as a replacement. Never that. But maybe as a way to make peace with the world. She paused. I never imagined fate would bring you to my door. I don't know what to do with that kind of mercy. Alyssa felt her throat tighten. The rain outside softened into a steady whisper, tapping gently against the window pane. She stared at her reflection faintly visible in the glass. Older, stronger, but still carrying a child's questions beneath her skin. She turned back to Rebecca. I'm not here for mercy, she said quietly. I'm here because a lost boy needed help. Rebecca nodded slowly, absorbing the truth without defense. I know, and I'm grateful. Another pause, gentler this time. Rebecca took a breath and lifted her eyes with a trembling hope. Alyssa, will you sit with me for a moment? Just sit. We don't have to talk about the past yet. Just share the same room again. Alyssa hesitated, her hand hovering above the back of a chair. The weight of years pressed into her chest. Anger, sorrow, longing, resentment, but also a strange, aching tenderness she wasn't ready to admit. She lowered herself into the chair. Rebecca sank into the couch beside Noah, who leaned against her side. She stroked his hair absently, her eyes never leaving Alyssa. Officer Turner lingered near the doorway. Was sensing this was more than a simple welfare call, but not invasive enough to interrupt. He seemed ready to leave if given permission, but unwilling to abandon the moment if it needed a witness. Alyssa finally allowed herself to breathe. The room felt both impossibly small and impossibly vast, like stepping back into a childhood bedroom that no longer fits the person you've become. Noah looked between them again. Mom, he whispered. Is she family? Rebecca's eyes filled once more. She nodded slowly. Yes, sweetheart. Her voice cracked through the truth she had carried for decades. She is. And for the first time since she'd walked into the storm that night, Alyssa felt something inside her shift. Not forgiveness yet, not healing, but the small, cautious opening of a door she thought had rusted shut forever. For a long while, the only sound in the room was the rain brushing gently against the window, as if reminding them that storms eventually soften. Alyssa sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, thumbs pressing into each other in a rhythm that betrayed the weight of everything she felt but could not yet voice. Rebecca sat across from her, still, almost reverent, as though afraid that any sudden movement might cause Alyssa to disappear again. Noah, sensing the heaviness but not fully understanding it, curled into his mother's side with his dinosaur tucked beneath his chin. His presence was a quiet tether, the only warmth in a room thick with the cold draft of years lost. Officer Turner stepped back into the hallway after a gentle nod from Rebecca, leaving the door ajar in case he was needed. Even as he walked away, his footsteps softened, as though he felt the sacredness of the moment behind him. Rebecca's voice broke the silence, soft, tremulous, shaped by years of words stored away. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. Alyssa swallowed, her eyes fixed on a small crack in the wooden floor, tracing its uneven path like a fault line. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted. "It's a lot. I know." "You don't," Alyssa said. Not harshly, but with the certainty of someone who had carried abandonment like a stone in her pocket. "You can't." Rebecca nodded, accepting the truth. "You're right. I don't know what your life became after I left. I only know what I hoped it would become." "And what was that?" "That you'd be safe," Rebecca whispered. "That someone steadier than me would teach you how to trust the world, that you wouldn't inherit the storms inside me." Alyssa pressed her nails into her palms. "But I did inherit them." Her voice cracked. "Every one of them." Rebecca covered her mouth as tears spilled freely. Not theatrical, not begging for pity, just the quiet collapse of someone facing the consequence of a moment that had reshaped a child's life. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry for every night you cried and I wasn't there. For every time you wondered why you weren't enough for me to stay." At that, Alyssa flinched. Because those words, the ones she'd never spoken aloud, were the very ones that had kept her awake so many childhood nights. Rebecca saw it, and something inside her shifted, a desperate courage rising. "You were always enough. Always. It was me who wasn't. I was drowning in myself, and I convinced myself that keeping my distance was the only way not to pull you under." Alyssa's breath shuddered. "You should have fought harder." "I know. You should have come back. I know. You should have chosen me." And the room trembled under the weight of those words. Rebecca covered her face with both hands, sobbing quietly, grief shaking through her shoulders. Noah sat up, startled by the intensity of it, but Alyssa gently motioned him to stay beside her. She wasn't ready to close the space between them yet. She wasn't sure she ever would be. Rebecca tried to speak through tears. "I've rehearsed 1,000 apologies in my head, but none of them feel worthy of what I did." She lowered her hands, her eyes red, her voice raw. "But if you'll let me, even for a minute, I'd like to tell you what happened." Alyssa hesitated. The instinct to walk away, to protect herself from old wounds reopening, tugged at her chest. But something else, something quieter, rooted her to the chair. Maybe it was the little boy watching them with wide, searching eyes. Maybe it was the rain coaxing softness into a night that had begun sharp as glass. Or maybe it was the simple truth that she had waited most of her life to hear an explanation she never got. She nodded once. Rebecca took a trembling breath. "The night I left, I didn't plan it. I wasn't in my right mind. I was drowning in anxiety, in panic, in guilt I couldn't name. I had lost my job. I was losing my home. I was afraid of hurting you. Emotionally, mentally. The way I had been hurt when I was little. I looked at you and all I could think was, she deserves better than the broken thing I've become." Alyssa's eyes filled, but she didn't wipe the tears away. "You thought abandoning me was better?" "I thought I was sparing you," Rebecca whispered. "But I see now. I was only sparing myself from facing how much I was failing." "Then why didn't you come back?" "I tried." Her voice trembled. "But by the time I found the courage to face my mistakes, your aunt had moved. The shelter had no forwarding address. Your school records were sealed. Every road I took ended." Alyssa pressed a hand to her forehead. "You had years, Rebecca, years." "I didn't stop looking," Rebecca whispered. "Not until I realized that every search was reopening the wound I had caused. For me, and potentially for you. I convinced myself that disrupting your life again might make things worse." "So you gave up," Alyssa said softly. Rebecca closed her eyes, the shame visible in every line of her face. Yes, and that is the thing I regret most in this life. Noah tugged gently at his mother's sleeve. Mom, did you lose her like I lost you today? The question pierced the room like a tender blade. Rebecca gathered him briefly into her arms. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered. I lost her. And I've spent my whole life wishing I hadn't. Alyssa felt something inside her twist, not forgiveness, not even understanding, but a faint acknowledgement of the truth in those words, of the pain sitting on both sides of this broken history. She stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping lightly against the floor. She walked toward the window, rain streaking the glass like the blurred memory of stormy nights long gone. She pressed her hand against the cool surface, grounding herself in its steadiness. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice low but steady. I don't know what happens next. I don't either, Rebecca replied softly. But if there is even a small part of you willing to try, I will follow your lead. Any pace, any distance. Alyssa nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was for Rebecca or for herself. I came into this night because a little boy was crying under a street lamp. That's all. I know, Rebecca whispered, but now I'm here. I know. Alyssa turned slowly, her eyes meeting Rebecca's. Two storms recognizing one another. And maybe that means something. Maybe it doesn't, but I'm here. Rebecca's breath broke across her lips like a prayer. That's more than I deserve. Noah slid off the couch and walked timidly toward Alyssa. He reached out, offering her the stuffed dinosaur as though it were a peace offering wrapped in innocence. This made me feel safe earlier, he said quietly. Maybe it can make you feel safe too. The kindness in that gesture cracked something open inside her, something fragile, something long buried, something aching for gentleness. She knelt and accepted the dinosaur, her fingers brushing Noah's small hand. Rebecca watched with trembling hope, a single tear rolling down her cheek. For the first time that night, Alyssa didn't look away. Night settled around the apartment like a soft, uncertain blanket. The rain had quieted to a steady whisper, a rhythm that felt almost forgiving as it tapped against the window. Alyssa still held the stuffed dinosaur in her hands, the faded fabric warm from Noah's touch. She ran her thumb along the loose stitching on its tail, wondering how something so small, a toy, a gesture, could steady her more than any apology ever had. Rebecca moved slowly, carefully, as if every step risked unsettling whatever fragile bridge had begun forming between them. She walked to the kitchen counter and poured a glass of water, hands trembling slightly. She set it on the coffee table near Alyssa, but didn't push it toward her. She simply placed it down, then stepped back, giving space without withdrawing entirely. "Would you like to sit?" Rebecca asked quietly. "I'm fine here," Alyssa replied, still kneeling beside Noah. The little boy leaned into her shoulder, comforted now that he understood the storm between the adults wasn't one that threatened him. Children sense many things: tension, fear, love, long before they can articulate any of it. Noah wasn't afraid anymore. He was curious, hopeful even. It reminded Alyssa of how she used to be before she learned that hope could vanish in the middle of the night without warning. Rebecca lowered herself to the floor opposite them, folding her legs beneath her like she used to when reading Alyssa bedtime stories years and years ago. The familiarity of the gesture caught Alyssa off guard. Silence settled again. Not hostile, not warm, simply honest. "I don't expect you to tell me anything about your life," Rebecca said gently, "but if you ever want to, I would listen." Alyssa nodded faintly, not committing, not rejecting. Rebecca swallowed. I'd like to know who you became. Alyssa hesitated, staring at the dinosaur's loose seam, at the tiny threads poking out like quiet truths. Then slowly, she looked up. I'm a graphic designer, she said. Freelance, mostly. I like making things look like they belong somewhere. Rebecca's eyes softened. That suits you. You always had an eye for color. You used to rearrange the crayons so they were in the right spectrum. I remember. The quiet admission startled them both. A flicker of warmth, thin as candlelight, passed between them. A reminder that memory isn't erased by absence, it simply waits in the dark. Alyssa cleared her throat, uncomfortable with how exposed she suddenly felt. Who took care of you after I left? Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My aunt, mostly. Rebecca nodded, absorbing the answer like a stone dropped into deep water. Did she treat you well? Alyssa paused. She tried, but she wasn't you. That truth stung more than anger ever could have. Rebecca let out a trembling exhale. I'm sorry, she whispered, not just for leaving, but for leaving you with the belief that you weren't wanted. You were. You were loved, even when I wasn't able to show it in the ways you needed. Alyssa didn't reply. Some wounds don't accept soothing. They simply learn to exist beside it. Noah climbed into her lap, uninvited but welcome in a way she didn't expect. He traced circles on her sleeve with one small finger. You're nice, he murmured sleepily. Alyssa's throat tightened. So are you. Rebecca watched them with an expression that held both ache and wonder. The kind of look a person wears when witnessing something they fear they don't deserve but hope to hold anyway. I know I don't have the right to ask this, Rebecca said softly, but would you stay a little while longer? Not to talk about the past if you don't want to, just to be here. Alyssa considered the request. Part of her wanted to leave, to protect herself, to step back before the fragile thread between them snapped under the weight of everything unsaid. Another part of her, quieter but persistent, wanted to remain in this room filled with the smell of vanilla and children's laughter and the echo of something softer she once remembered calling home. She finally nodded. Rebecca's eyes glimmered with gratitude. She reached for a blanket draped over the couch and unfolded it gently, laying it across Noah's legs as he settled more fully against Alyssa. Then, as though the act of caring for her son was a small offering of peace, Rebecca sat back. You look tired, she said softly. Alyssa gave a faint smile. It's been a night. That it has. Another silence fell between them. But this one felt different. Less jagged at the edges, less cold. What about you? Alyssa asked suddenly. What did you do all these years? Rebecca blinked, surprised by the question. I worked wherever I could. Stores, nursing homes, a school cafeteria for a while. I moved a lot at first, trying to outrun the guilt. She paused. But after Noah was born, I stopped running. He needed stability. He needed a mother who stayed. Alyssa's eyes drifted to the framed photos on the wall. Rebecca, holding a baby. Noah's first day of preschool. A birthday party with homemade decorations. She felt something twist in her chest. Not jealousy exactly, but a sharp awareness of everything she missed, of everything she wasn't part of. You're a good mom to him, Alyssa said quietly. Rebecca closed her eyes at that, as if the words were a blessing she never expected to receive. I'm trying to be, she whispered. I've spent years trying. Alyssa ran her fingers through Noah's soft hair. He loves you. That's obvious. He saved me, Rebecca replied. More than once. Alyssa looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, she didn't just see the woman who left. She saw the woman who broke, who fell apart quietly, alone, who rebuilt herself piece by piece, not because she stopped loving her, but because she didn't know how to love her well then. A gentle tapping sounded at the open door. Officer Turner leaned in slightly. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, voice calm, respectful. "Yes," Rebecca said. "Thank you." Alyssa nodded as well. "We're okay." He gave a small smile. "I'll be downstairs finishing paperwork. If you need anything, just call." When he disappeared, the room felt smaller again, but in a way that folded them closer, not tighter. Rebecca shifted. "Alyssa, if you ever decide you want distance, or boundaries, or time, I'll respect whatever you choose." Alyssa studied her for a long moment. "I don't know what I want. You don't have to know tonight." "Then why does it feel like I should?" Rebecca offered a sad, small smile. "Because the heart doesn't understand time the way the clock does. It remembers everything all at once." Alyssa's eyes softened. The truth of that sat between them like a candle, fragile, luminous. "Maybe," Alyssa whispered, "we start small. I don't know how to rebuild something I barely remember. We can start wherever you choose." Alyssa exhaled shakily, maybe with a conversation. "Not tonight, but someday." Rebecca nodded, hope flickering through her expression like a match catching light. "Someday," she echoed. Noah yawned, rubbing his eyes. "Mom? Can she come back another day?" The question drifted into the room like a small, fluttering thing. Delicate, full of possibility. Alyssa looked at him, then at Rebecca. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but maybe." Rebecca's breath steadied, her shoulders easing for the first time since the door opened. The dinosaur slipped from Alyssa's hand and landed in her lap. She held it gently, feeling the weight of a child's comfort, a mother's regret, and her own cautious hope woven into its seams. Tonight didn't give her closure. It gave her something quieter, the faint outline of a path she didn't know she wanted to walk. And for the first time since childhood, she didn't feel entirely alone in the storm. The hours slipped by almost unnoticed, the way time sometimes moves when two people sit with the weight of everything unsaid between them. The storm outside settled into a soft rain that tapped gently at the windows, a steady rhythm that smoothed the edges of the night. Alyssa remained on the floor with Noah resting heavily against her, drifting in and out of sleep. She'd loosened her grip on the stuffed dinosaur but hadn't let it go completely. Its tiny, frayed tail brushed her palm in quiet, rhythmic movements as if reminding her, "You're here now. Just breathe." Rebecca rose quietly and dimmed the lamp until its glow was nothing more than a warm, amber circle resting on the rug. She lingered near the counter, watching Alyssa with a stillness that held gratitude, longing, and years of regret braided so tightly together she no longer knew where one feeling ended and another began. For nearly 2 decades, she had imagined a moment like this. Impossible, unlikely, undeserved, but none of her imagined versions ever prepared her for seeing her daughter sitting in her living room, illuminated by the dim golden light, holding her grandson's dinosaur as if it carried the fragile thread between past and present. "You can lay him down," Rebecca whispered, gesturing toward the small bedroom at the end of the hall. Alyssa shook her head. "He's comfortable here." Rebecca nodded. "Okay." Neither woman pressed beyond that. A low hum rose through the building, a heater kicking on, The sound of pipes settling, a neighbor's muffled laugh behind a thin wall. Everything felt close, familiar, but not quite hers. Alyssa looked around slowly, her eyes drifting across the framed photos of birthdays, school projects, little trophies, and crayon drawings taped above the light switch. She took in the neat stack of mail on the counter, the recipe card stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a tiny apple, the laundry basket tucked halfway into the hallway. It was a life, complete, lived, warm, a life she had not been part of. Rebecca saw her gaze and followed it, and something like shame flickered across her features. "You deserved all of this," she murmured. "A home like this, a life like this." Alyssa didn't look away from the photos. "Children deserve it," she said quietly. "Not all of them get it." Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself as though trying to shield against a cold that wasn't in the room. "If I could rewrite every page of your childhood, I would." Alyssa finally turned to her. "You can't rewrite it." "I know." Rebecca's breath trembled. "But maybe we can write something new, even if it's small, even if it's slow." Alyssa didn't answer. She wasn't ready to step toward hope, but she wasn't stepping away either. Noah stirred in her lap, blinking with the heavy confusion of a child waking somewhere unfamiliar. He looked up at Alyssa, then at his mother. "Did she stay?" he whispered. "I'm right here," Alyssa said. He rested his head back against her arm, reassured. Rebecca approached cautiously and knelt beside them, careful not to intrude on the small patch of carpet that had become Alyssa's island. "Can I?" she asked, motioning toward Noah. Alyssa nodded. Rebecca smoothed her son's hair and kissed his forehead. "You scared me today," she murmured. "But you also..." She glanced at Alyssa. "You also brought someone back I never thought I'd see again." Noah yawned and looked between them, his eyes trying to assemble the pieces of a story he didn't yet understand. "Are you family?" he asked softly. Rebecca froze. Alyssa's breath caught. Children ask simple questions, but they carry the weight of truth adults spend years avoiding. Alyssa swallowed and looked at Rebecca, waiting, perhaps to hear what story this woman would tell him, what version of their history she would offer. Rebecca took a shaky breath. "Yes, sweetheart," she said gently. She's part of our family." Alyssa's eyes widened slightly, her chest tightening in a way she didn't expect. She wasn't sure if she agreed with the word, not yet, not fully. But she didn't correct it. Not tonight. Not in front of Noah, who needed something stable to hold on to after everything that had happened. Rebecca sat back on her heels. "If you want to stay the night, I can make up the couch." Alyssa shook her head. "I can't." "I understand. Truly." "But," Alyssa added, surprising herself with the word, "maybe I can stay a little longer." Rebecca's expression softened into something fragile, almost luminous. "As long as you want." Alyssa looked down at Noah again. "He's a good kid." "He is," Rebecca whispered. "He has a good heart. He asks about people he sees on the street, wonders if they're lonely. He keeps extra crackers in his backpack to give away." Alyssa smiled faintly. "He reminds me of someone." Rebecca's eyes filled. "He reminds me of you." Alyssa felt something inside her shift at those words, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. The closest thing she had to a childhood memory with Rebecca was a mismatched collage of tenderness and absence, of lullabies that ended too soon and mornings that began with empty rooms. And yet here, in this quiet apartment, she saw traces of who that woman once tried to be, traces of who she might have become if life had been kinder to both of them. "Do you ever talk about me?" Alyssa asked unexpectedly. Rebecca blinked. every day," she whispered. "Not out loud, but in my heart, I say your name more than my own." Alyssa felt her throat tighten again. "Why didn't you look for me harder?" Rebecca took a moment before answering. "Because every time I reached out, I saw the girl I'd hurt, and I was terrified she'd look back at me with the same eyes you have right now." Alyssa looked away. "I wanted to protect you from the version of me who broke," Rebecca continued quietly. "I thought leaving you behind meant leaving that brokenness behind too. But I see now." Her voice cracked. "I only passed the brokenness forward." Alyssa pressed her fingers to her forehead, exhausted by the truth of it. Rebecca reached for the edge of the rug, twisting a loose thread between her fingers. "If you hate me," she whispered, "I will accept that. If you never want to see me again, I will accept that too. But I need you to know one thing before you decide." Alyssa lifted her eyes, cautious. Rebecca steadied her breath. "I loved you. Even in the moments when I didn't know how, even when my fear was louder than my love, even when I walked away, my love never left. I did. That's the truth I've carried for 20 years. Alyssa closed her eyes. Tears fell silently, not the sharp, stinging tears of anger, but the kind that come from finally hearing the words you begged for in your childhood dreams. Noah reached up with his small hand and wiped one tear from her cheek. "Don't cry," he whispered. "My mom cries too sometimes. It doesn't mean she's bad." Alyssa let out a shaky laugh, soft, broken, healing all at once. Rebecca covered her mouth, trying not to sob too loudly. The room, once filled with decades of distance, now hummed with something delicate and warm, like the slow thaw of winter after a long, harsh season. No Michael Bay explosion, no dramatic confrontation, no easy forgiveness. Just three people, one broken, one healing, one innocent, sitting in the quiet truth of what love can survive, even when it's been lost for years. Alyssa wrapped her arm around Noah and pulled him close. She met Rebecca's eyes across the soft glow of the room, and for the first time that night, she didn't see only the woman who left. She saw the woman who had come back. Morning arrived quietly, slipping into the apartment on the back of a soft golden light that settled over everything it touched. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, but the air still carried that gentle stillness storms often leave behind. The kind that makes the world feel rinsed, emptied, and ready for something new. Alyssa sat on the edge of the couch where she'd spent the night, elbows on her knees, hands clasped loosely as she watched the early sun catch on the dust floating above the rug. Noah was still asleep in his room, a small rise and fall beneath a blanket decorated with planets. Rebecca stood at the stove, not cooking, just holding the handle of a pan, her breath wavering as though afraid even the simplest sound might break whatever fragile peace had settled between them. She looked older in the morning light. Not old by years, but old in the way people look when they've lived with their regrets so long they've softened into something nearly tender. Alyssa lifted her eyes. "You don't drink coffee this early," she said quietly, surprising herself with the memory. Rebecca turned, startled. "I haven't changed much," she admitted. "I still make it out of habit, even if I never finish the cup." Alyssa nodded, and a thin smile grazed her lips. Small, unsteady, but real enough to reach her eyes. A long silence followed, not the strained kind from the night before, but the kind that lets two people breathe in the same room without needing to hide. The kind that comes after truth has finally been spoken, even if the ground beneath it still trembles. Rebecca approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. "Last night," she began, then paused. "I don't know what it meant for you. I don't want to assume anything. I don't want to rush you. Her voice softened into something nearly breaking. I'm grateful you stayed. Alyssa traced a finger absent-mindedly along the seam of a couch pillow. I didn't expect to, she whispered, but I didn't want to leave him. Or you, not yet. Rebecca's eyes glistened, and she nodded as if receiving a gift she never believed she'd be offered. I'm not promising anything, Alyssa added quickly. I'm not asking you to, Rebecca said. I just want to walk carefully, patiently, the way I should have walked when you were small. Alyssa took in a slow breath and let it out. I don't know what the future looks like. You don't have to, Rebecca said softly. We can start with a morning. Footsteps padded down the hallway, uneven and sleepy. Noah emerged with his dinosaur tucked under his arm, rubbing his eyes with the heel of one hand. When he saw Alyssa, his entire face brightened in a way that made something inside her soften instantly. You stayed, he said, smiling through the remnants of sleep. She nodded. Morning, buddy. He walked straight to her and placed the stuffed dinosaur on her lap as though offering her something sacred. He wants to stay with you today, Noah announced seriously. He told me he does. Alyssa laughed softly and felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. Does he now? Noah nodded. He says you look like you needed him. Alyssa swallowed. Maybe I do. Rebecca stood behind her son, hands resting gently on his shoulders. She watched the exchange quietly, her expression a careful mixture of wonder and aching hope. Noah turned and looked up at his mother. Can she come with us to the park later? Rebecca looked to Alyssa, letting the decision belong entirely to her. Alyssa hesitated, not out of fear but out of the strange tenderness of the moment. Then she nodded slowly. Yeah, she said. I think I can. Noah beamed and ran off to find his shoes, shouting something about showing her the big slide that isn't scary, not even a little. Left alone with Rebecca again, Alyssa stood and moved toward the window. Outside, the street had begun to wake. A dog tugging its owner down the sidewalk, a cyclist balancing a paper bag of groceries, the steady hum of a bus heading downtown. She watched the sunlight spread across the wet asphalt, turning puddles into small mirrors. I thought the world would stop if I ever saw you again, Alyssa said quietly. But it didn't. It just shifted. Rebecca stepped beside her, keeping a respectful distance. It shifted for me too, she whispered. I thought forgiveness was something I would never earn, and maybe I still won't. But being in the same room as you, hearing your voice, seeing you hold my son, she pressed a hand to her chest. That's a kind of grace I don't know what to do with. Alyssa looked at her reflection in the window. Two figures standing side by side, not quite touching, but no longer divided by the years that should have separated them forever. The ache was still there, but it didn't feel quite as sharp this morning. Something new had taken root beside it, fragile, tender, uncertain, but undeniably alive. You know, Alyssa said, a faint smile tugging at her lips, I used to imagine what you'd say if we ever met again. All the things I wanted to hear. She shook her head. But none of my imaginary versions ever sounded as honest as last night. Rebecca exhaled softly. Honest is all I have left to give. Alyssa nodded. Then let's start there. Rebecca's breath caught, her hand flying to her mouth. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Those 4 words were enough to undo her, enough to stitch something together that had torn long before her son was ever born. Noah came running back into the room wearing mismatched socks and one shoe. "I'm ready," he declared proudly. Alyssa laughed. "Not quite, little man." Rebecca knelt to help him, her hand steadying his ankle. "We've got time," she murmured, glancing up at Alyssa. "We do," Alyssa replied. And for the first time, truly the first time, she believed it. They walked outside together, stepping into a day that felt quiet and new. The air smelled like wet earth and sunlight. Noah swung their hands as though trying to stitch them all together by sheer force of joy. And maybe in some small way he did. Families are not always built by blood, nor broken by absence. Sometimes they fracture, and sometimes, through kindness, truth, and the bravery to stay a little longer, they begin again. As they reached the corner, where their paths had first crossed the night before, Noah tugged at both their hands and pointed to the brightening sky. "Look," he said, "it stopped raining." Alyssa tilted her head up. The clouds had parted, letting a thin ribbon of sunlight fall across their faces. She closed her eyes and whispered almost to herself, "Maybe it's time." Rebecca asked, "Time for what?" Alyssa opened her eyes and met hers gently. "For a beginning." They continued walking toward the park, toward swings and slides and small laughter, toward conversations that would shake and heal them both, toward mornings that might eventually outnumber the years lost to silence. Some stories do not end with certainty. They end with a door left open, with a hand reaching back, with a child pulling two hearts closer than they believed possible. And that is enough.